Ukraine strikes Russian ammunition arsenal with FP-5 Flamingo missiles near Kotluban. The night sky over the western military district trembles at exactly 2:14 hours local time as orbital infrared satellites register a sudden thermal bloom across the steppe corridor northwest of Kotluban. Analysts inside the secure monitoring cell mark the spike as abnormal because the heat signature is narrow, fast, and directional. Not artillery, not aircraft, something slimmer, something guided. The tracking software assigns a provisional classification, precision strike projectile, while ground acoustic sensors placed along the logistics belt begin registering delayed shock patterns, 3 seconds apart, meaning multi-stage impacts are likely inbound. Command screens illuminate with layered telemetry feeds as the strike window opens and the operation clock begins counting upward. Reconnaissance drones already loitering at high altitude pivot their gimbals toward the suspected ammunition. Reserve grid, coordinates previously mapped through weeks of signal intelligence and convoy tracking. Tonight is not random. Tonight is timed, planned, rehearsed. The target is a hardened ammunition arsenal, used as a redistribution node. Shielded by earth berms, radar camouflage netting, and decoy heat generators. But thermal masking fails against multi-spectrum seekers. And the incoming weapons, identified in the scenario briefing as FP-5 Flamingo precision missiles, are designed specifically for this kind of deception environment. Launched from a standoff distance estimated between 140 and 180 kilometers, depending on flight arc and booster profile. The missiles ride low at first, terrain-hugging guidance enabled by digital elevation mapping, then climb sharply during terminal approach to gain plunge angle advantage, reducing interceptor reaction time. At 02:16, the first forward passive radar picket attempts classification, but receives only fragmented returns. Bodies use low observable shaping and cooled exhaust channels to shrink infrared plume visibility. Defenders misread the speed, assuming drone class, and the delay becomes fatal. Inside the arsenal perimeter, automated counter-battery systems remain idle because no artillery trajectory is detected. This is not a shell, not a rocket swarm. This is precision penetration doctrine unfolding in silence. The narration feed describes the guidance stack, inertial navigation blended with satellite correction, backed by scene-matching terminal imaging, meaning even if jamming begins, the missile remembers the ground like a photograph and flies into it. At 02:17:32, the first FP-5 Flamingo enters terminal dive. Onboard sensor package switching from navigation mode to target discrimination mode, scanning for ammunition bunker roof geometry, ventilation shafts, and reinforced entry seams, because structural weak points matter more than surface area. The warhead is not built for blast radius, but for internal ignition. A delayed fuse penetration design meant to enter, travel, then detonate where propellant stacks and shell crates are densest. A weapon made not just to destroy, but to multiply destruction, using the enemy's own stored explosives. Perimeter microphones capture a rising tier of air pressure. Too fast for drones, too sharp for jets. And then the first impact lands with a muffled ground punch, rather than a cinematic fireball. Exactly as designed. Dust lifts before flame, because penetration precedes detonation. Half a second later, the bunker core flashes white from within. And then the ammunition cooks off in chain detonations. Each secondary blast larger than the missile's own payload, turning one precision hit into a rolling internal eruption. The shockwave arrives outward like a delayed thunderclap. Radar now shows debris columns rising vertically, confirming magazine ignition. Command analysts tag Strike 1 as catastrophic effectiveness. At 02:18:2, more missiles arrive on staggered vectors, deconflicted in flight, so their seekers do not compete for the same aim point. Network targeting allows cooperative distribution. One selects a fuel propellant depot adjacent to the main bunker line. The other chooses a transport loading shelter where armored trucks were staged for dawn movement. This sequencing is intentional. First disable supply, then ignite fuel, then block evacuation. The second missile uses a dual-mode seeker blending millimeter-wave radar with imaging infrared to see through smoke already forming from the first blast. Countermeasures try to flood the spectrum with noise, but frequency agile hopping defeats lockbreak. The narration emphasizes sensor fusion, no single eye, but many, stitched into one decision. Impact 2 produces a horizontal fire sheet as fuel vapor ignites, lighting the entire storage grid in orange arcs, visible for kilometers. Overhead drones automatically reduce exposure altitude due to rising thermal turbulence. Onboard AI stabilizers compensate for shock columns, continuing to stream battle damage assessment. Inside the defensive command post, confusion spreads because attack classification still lags reality. Operators debate whether this is airstrike, missile raid, or sabotage chain reaction. That hesitation costs minutes, and in precision warfare, minutes equal infrastructure. At 02:20, a fourth FP-5 Flamingo missile executes a delayed arrival profile, having taken a longer curved route to avoid overlapping air defense cones. This demonstrates route diversity programming, each missile choosing a different corridor through the threat map. The guidance computer constantly recalculates based on detected emitters, effectively steering around radar like water around rock. This final strike targets the communications relay mast inside the arsenal complex, not for explosive yield, but for blindness effect. The warhead is fragmentation optimized, shredding antenna arrays and microwave dishes, isolating the site from higher command. The narration voice lowers. Destruction is not only firepower, it is silence. With comms down, coordinated firefighting response collapses into local improvisation, which is slower and riskier when ammunition is detonating unpredictably. Secondary explosions continue for the next 12 minutes, indicating mixed caliber storage, artillery shells, rockets, small arms rounds, each producing distinct acoustic signatures that remote sensors can classify. Analysts later use those sound fingerprints to estimate what was stored and how much was lost. Thermal satellites mark the burn area expanding beyond the original bunker footprint, meaning internal sympathetic detonation breached containment walls. The strike planners expected this and selected timing during lowest personnel density window to reduce unintended casualties while maximizing material loss. The script feed overlays technical breakdown. Estimated missile speed in terminal phase between Mach 2 and Mach 3 equivalent depending on dive profile. Circular error probability under 3 meters under satellite guidance, under 8 meters under jammed inertial scene match mode, warhead class, penetrator with delayed programmable fuse, guidance resilience, anti-jam, multi-sensor, terrain referenced, launch doctrine, dispersed mobile platforms to prevent counterstrike. No single launcher revealing origin. This complicates retaliation calculus. In the wider strategic frame, the attack demonstrates deep strike reach without aircraft entry into defended airspace, which shifts risk from pilots to hardware. Modern conflict doctrine increasingly favors this exchange ratio. As fires continue to burn near Kotluban, regional air defense units finally switch to maximum alert. But the attack wave is already complete. No follow-up salvo comes, which itself is psychological design. Uncertainty forces defenders to hold posture longer, draining readiness cycles. Reconnaissance drones perform orbiting. Confirmation passes. Counting destroyed structures using before-after geometry comparison. Automated change detection marks over 60% structural compromise within the storage zone. Logistics analysts translate that into operational impact. Artillery tempo reduction, convoy resupply delays, forced redistribution from farther depots, each adding friction to battlefield timelines. And friction wins wars as often as firepower does. The narration closes this phase with the operational lesson. Precision is leverage, timing is force multiplier, sensors are the new scouts, algorithms the new navigators, and the strike near Kotluban becomes a case study in layered targeting, cooperative missile guidance, and infrastructure denial under contested spectrum conditions, while the night sky still glows with rolling ammunition fires, and the clock continues to tick past 02:32 hours, with secondary detonations echoing across the steppe. Ukraine strikes Russian ammunition arsenal with FP-5 Flamingo missiles near Kotluban. Continuation cinematic war scenario narration. The fires are still climbing when the overhead surveillance drone switches from visual spectrum to thermal contrast mode, and the battlefield transforms into a living heat map, where every burning ammunition cell appears like a miniature volcano. Analysts timestamp the secondary chain reactions at 2:34 hours, confirming that internal storage segmentation failed exactly as the strike planners predicted. The blast pattern reveals layered storage architecture, outer shell racks, inner propellant cages, and deep vault shell stacks, each igniting in sequence rather than simultaneously, proving that the penetrator detonation point achieved mid-depth placement instead of surface burst, which is the core design purpose of the FP-5 Flamingo strike package. The narration voice tightens with urgency as remote electronic support measures begin scanning the spectrum for retaliatory radar illumination, but detect only scattered search beams and no coherent lock, meaning the defenders are still reconstructing the attack profile instead of preparing immediate counterfire. This confusion window is described as the golden silence, the period after a precision strike where information lag becomes as destructive as the explosion itself. At 02:36, a high-altitude signals drone records fragmented emergency transmissions from the perimeter units, reporting internal ignition, vehicle losses, and command link failure. Packet loss above 60% indicates the earlier relay mass strike achieved its objective, cutting synchronized response. The script shifts into technical breakdown mode, explaining how modern deep strike doctrine does not rely on volume, but on sequencing. First penetration, second ignition, third isolation. A triad model designed to collapse logistics nodes with minimal munitions expenditure. The camera feed, imagined in documentary style, glides over. Shockwave flattened revetments and ruptured bunker doors blown outward from inside pressure, not outside force, which confirms internal cook-off escalation. Ammunition sympathetic detonation temperatures exceed 3,000 degrees Celsius in confined bursts, enough to warp steel door frames and liquefy cable runs. Infrared bloom columns now reach thousands of meters high and become visible to orbital early warning satellites, automatically flagging the site as a major detonation event, rather than routine artillery exchange. Strategic monitors log the grid for post-strike modeling, because every destroyed depot changes the supply geometry of the front line. Trucks must travel farther, refuel more often, and risk more exposure. Fiction multiplies quietly. The narration slows slightly and explains the missile guidance architecture again in thriller tone. Launch phase inertial spine, mid-course satellite correction, terrain contour comparison, terminal multi-sensor lock using imaging infrared, plus micro-radar edge detection. A layered brain designed to keep thinking even when blinded, jammed, or spoofed. Simulated overlays show how the missile compares roofline angles and vent placements against stored target models before committing to the final dive, choosing the structural weak seam rather than geometric center. Because smart destruction is about leverage points, not symmetry. At 0241, remaining security vehicles attempt to reposition, but the access roads are cratered by internal blasts, throwing debris across the routes. Mobility denial achieved without a single dedicated road attack munition, which the narrator calls collateral geometry. When one explosion rearranges the battlefield for free. Overhead loiter drones maintain distance due to rising convective columns that can destabilize rotorcraft. Fixed-wing unmanned platforms take over observation, switching to oblique angle imaging to estimate crater depth through shadow measurement algorithms. Early. Automated assessment estimates over 50 primary storage cells destroyed or compromised. Each cell previously capable of feeding multiple artillery batteries for days. The operational math turns fire into time. Days of lost fire support. Weeks of supply rerouting. Months of stockpile rebuilding. At 0246, defensive air units finally launch interceptor patrols, but find empty sky, because the strike used low-altitude masked approach and rapid terminal climb, meaning radar detection occurred too late for engagement envelopes. The narrator emphasizes reaction gap. Detection is not interception, and modern precision weapons are built to widen that gap by seconds that matter. A reconstruction graphic describes estimated engagement distance. Approximately 160 kilometers standoff launch envelope, depending on route curvature and terrain masking, keeping launch platforms outside most short-range defense umbrellas. Mobile launch doctrine further complicates counter-battery response. Firing units relocate within minutes, leaving behind thermal decoys and false signatures. Investigators later must separate ghost heat from real exhaust trails. The burning depot continues erupting intermittently as mixed-caliber rounds ignite unpredictably. Small arms ammunition produces crackling bursts. Rocket motors produce screaming flare trails. Artillery shells create concussive ground thumps. Acoustic classifiers tag each sound family to estimate remaining hazard zones. Firefighting units hold perimeter instead of entry because internal blast probability remains high. The script voice turns reflective but tense. Modern arsenals are paradoxes, built for concentrated power, yet vulnerable to concentrated precision. One guided penetrator can awaken thousands of stored explosions. At 0253, The thermal intensity begins slow decline at outer bunkers, while core vaults still burn white-hot, meaning inner stacks carried the densest propellant loads. Pre-strike imagery, with current frames and outlines the destruction footprint. Polygons expand across the grid like digital scars. Analysts attach probability scores to each structure: destroyed, severely damaged, mission kill, or intact. Logistics impact dashboards update automatically. Downstream artillery availability projections adjust downward accordingly. The documentary tone notes how wars are increasingly measured in spreadsheets, seconds after they are measured in fireballs. A delayed sensor sweep checks for hazardous material plumes and finds none above threshold, suggesting primarily conventional munitions were stored, not chemical agents, reducing regional contamination risk. At 0302, the last major secondary detonation rolls through the complex, a deep bass shock that lifts dust rings across the steppe and marks the end of large-scale internal ignition. After that, only scattered flare-ups remain. The strike window officially closes. Post-strike doctrine begins. Observe, confirm, and adapt. Confirm. Do not restrike unless regeneration detected, because repeated hits waste precision assets. Patience becomes a weapon. The narrator summarizes the tactical lessons in a steady cinematic cadence. Sensor fusion defeats camouflage. Route diversity defeats interception. Penetrator warheads turn storage into amplifiers. Communication disruption multiplies chaos. Timing reduces resistance. And distance preserves launch platforms. The event near Kotluban becomes a model scenario used in future wargaming simulations to demonstrate how a small number of intelligent missiles can dismantle a large ammunition network node without air superiority or mass bombardment. The screen fades from flame to cooling embers while the operation clock stops and the after-action file is sealed. Narration drops to a closing whisper. Precision changed the night. Logistics felt the blow. And the battlefield tomorrow will echo the shortage created today. Breakdowns and scenario documentaries like this. Like the video and subscribe to the channel.